intricacies of the developments in the United States or in other countries. I would simply say that judicial activism was an extremely important instrument of producing a free democratic, freiheitlich-demokratische Staatsordnung in Germany after the Bonn Constitution of 1949. The judges remade the Constitution. In a sense, they produced the electoral laws, the supervision of them, making sure they operated. These things occurred, and the situation, in a certain sense, was very ripe for transference to the international arena and to the international court. Let me take you immediately then to the international court. It isn't the United States Supreme Court, it isn't the German Constitutional Court. It has its own unique history. The International Court, the International Court of Justice, was formed in 1946, but it had a predecessor, the old Permanent Court of International Justice, the classical court, international court, you might say. The origins of that court, though, are not particularly relevant, except as a historical artifact, to the existence of the present court. The old International Permanent Court of International Justice was a court of 12 judges, but I looked at the first bench, created in 1922. There were 12 judges, but 10 of them were from Europe and Latin America. There were only 2 outsiders, and the 2 outsiders were the United States, which of course, you know, didn't join the League of Nations, but nevertheless they had a distinguished group of succession of judges, and a Japanese judge. Japan in those days, the Japanese judges were very skilled students of the civil law, and in a certain sense, I say this because one can speak in a very kindly way of the judges on the International Court of Justice, the later court. These were strict constructionists. They were jurisprudence of concept people. So the old court provided the background to the new court, and I think for our purposes it illustrates the dilemma of judicial activism. One very great case, the Austro-German Customs Union in 1931. Europe was recovering from World War I, recovering from the concept of all guilt on one side, origins of war, all the credit on the other side, the reparations policies which prostrated German recovery, and I suppose in a long-range sense, one of the triggering factors in the approach to World War II. The German economy was chaotic. It was even worse for the succession states to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the small states in Central Europe. They really didn't have the means to exist economically under the Depression. And the logical point is, well, can't we collaborate with our neighbors? And that's Austro-German Customs Union. Austria said, look, without our empire, we don't say anything about the past. We enjoyed the empire. We think we were a fine state, but nevertheless, the reality is we can't exist. We would like a customs union with Germany. And the German leaders, who at that stage, this was before Hitler, said it makes sense. So, how do you decide it? It went to the International Court. And here you get this dichotomy between judicial activism and non-activism, what you later call judicial self-restraint. The concept, but this is a very political issue, isn't it? And we're judges. And if we get into political issues, if you remember that in the 19th century, the customs union was the precursor of German reunification under Bismarck. So a step, customs union means political union, and this would reverse the Treaty of Versailles. Yes, I suppose this is true, but it might also solve the chaos the economic chaos and disaster in Central Europe. These states have to survive. How do you decide? Well, there were two great judges on that old Permanent Court of International Justice. One was the Italian Angelotti. Angelotti was a remarkable soul, and I was very struck in his influence in Latin America. In fact, one of the presidents of the International Court of Justice had been a student of, from Argentina, had been a student of Angelotti and admired him and had a photograph of Angelotti on his desk. And a very strong judge, intellectually, you doesn't have to say, is a man of unusual talents. And the Swiss judge, Huber, who's remembered for the concept of intertemporal law we'll return to in a moment. But Angelotti wrote the decision. It was essentially an 8-7. It was an 8-7 decision rejecting the customs union, counter essentially to ancillary agreements to the Treaty of Versailles. It was a decision in which he justified on the basis we can't get into political issues. We're a court. Ours is a neutral role. Ours is divorced from political issues. It's interesting to note at the time not all the world accepted the wisdom of this. So Hersch Lauterpacht, who was a professor at this stage at Cambridge, he later became a British judge in the World Court. Hersch Lauterpacht was clear that it was an unfortunate decision, and it wasn't well reasoned. J.L. Brierley, who many of you may know, wrote the most lucid, I think, short text in international law. Brierley's International Law is still a beautiful book, and I use it myself in lectures with students. They could read it, beautiful, clear English, not like the ordinary legal textbook. But Brierley said this is incomprehensible. The ruling doesn't make sense. You read it through, the judgment of the court, and there are gaps in it. It's almost as if somebody typed it up and forgot pages 3 and 4. They left them out. It doesn't make sense. So it's part of the heritage. The court stayed pure in a legal sense, in a judicial sense. The judges didn't get into politics. But in the run-up to World War II, the collapse of the Central European little democratic states, the children of Versailles, the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, these are in, their collapse was certainly one of the triggering factors in the run-up to World War II. So after World War II, a new court was established. It isn't immediately, by the way, a very representative court for obvious reasons. The enemy states can't come in, so there's not a Japanese judge, there's not a German judge. There is it's pre-decolonization, so there aren't many if there are Africans around, they're represented by the European colonial powers. It's a court very much in the old sense that a court is a court. A court doesn't make politics. It doesn't get into policy. It is a body that interprets logically old existing precedents or old existing state practice and nothing more. There were some redeeming features in this. There was a brilliant Chilean judge who served in the World Court, Judge Alvarez. I think I have the pronunciation, the emphasis right, but a brilliant judge, and he developed a concept, le nouveau droit international, the new international law in relation to a new international society. It's funny how particular judges, by the strength of their personality and in a certain sense the charisma when they meet people, one of the persons whom he met, her father actually was a judge, the French judge in the World Court, Judge Badevant, but Madame Suzanne Bastide met Alvarez, and she's very taken by him, she is remembered at the Sorbonne because she had more doctoral students. I think in those days a professor didn't take doctoral students too readily, but she had so many. Her children are all around in that sense. By the way, her own daughter is a professor of international law too, but she had all these students around, and